She woke up from surgery expecting relief. Instead, she was told she could never have children again. The doctor said it had been necessary. Later, investigators would prove it wasn't. That doctor was Javed Perwaiz. He worked as a women's health specialist in Virginia for many years. Thousands of women trusted him during some of the most personal and emotional moments of their lives. They went to him for pregnancies, unusual test results, pain, and worries about serious conditions. They trusted his words completely, but that trust gave him access and power. Power that, according to investigators, he misused. They say he not only took money from these women, but also took away their ability to have children and their sense of safety. The court found that between around 2010 and 2019, he carried out a plan where he convinced women to go through unnecessary medical procedures. These included permanent operations that stopped them from having children and other invasive procedures that were not needed. He billed government and private insurance programs for them and made large profits for years. A jury found him guilty on many counts, and the judge sentenced him to nearly 60 years in prison. The government described his pattern as very clear. Case after case showed the same thing. A woman would visit him with a small concern, maybe pain, an abnormal test, or a pregnancy, and he would turn it into something that sounded like an emergency. He told some women they might have a serious illness, or were at immediate risk. He told others they needed surgery right away. Often those surgeries happened just days later. He would schedule multiple surgeries on the same day, including procedures that removed organs, unnecessary clean-out operations, and early labor inductions. Investigators said he sometimes changed the due dates on pregnancy charts so it looked like the early inductions were medically necessary. They also said he changed paperwork to hide what he was doing, and even altered consent forms to make it look like patients had agreed when they hadn't. For many women, the result was permanent. Their bodies were changed forever, leaving lasting physical pain and emotional scars. So why did he do it? Investigators say the motive was money. The more surgeries he performed, the more he billed insurance companies. The evidence showed that his business brought in millions. He lived a luxury lifestyle with expensive cars, property, and a lot of cash. Investigators called it simple greed. This behavior didn't come out of nowhere. His record already had warnings. Back in the 1980s, one hospital had removed his rights to perform surgeries after concerns about unnecessary procedures. In the 1990s, he faced federal charges over tax issues that affected his license. But even after that, he continued practicing and performing surgeries for years. Those past incidents became part of the story prosecutors told in court, showing a long pattern that stretched over decades. The courtroom was filled with emotional moments. One by one, women came forward to share what had happened to them. Some said they went in for pregnancy care and later discovered that major surgery had been done without clear reason. Others said they were told they needed to deliver early when there was no medical reason. Some learned that their paperwork had been changed or signed in ways that broke state rules. Their words were deeply personal. They spoke about the pain and the loss they felt. The judge and jurors were struck not just by the amount of money involved, but by the human damage caused. The government presented evidence from dozens of women, and many more came forward after his arrest. Hundreds reported similar experiences. Prosecutors said he used his position as a doctor to perform unnecessary medical procedures and get paid for them. His lawyers told a different story. They said he believed he was doing the right thing, that his decisions were part of normal medical judgment, and that the charges went too far. He denied all wrongdoing and continued to say he was innocent even after the trial. When his lawyers appealed, the higher court rejected their claims, saying the evidence against him was too strong. His conviction stayed in place. So how did this all come to light? It started with a tip and a growing number of complaints. Federal agents began investigating, and eventually, a grand jury charged him with healthcare fraud and other related offenses. The trial went on for several weeks. The jury found him guilty on most counts. At sentencing, the judge gave him a long prison term, saying the acts were extremely serious. In court, many women shared how their lives had changed forever. The judge called the situation both shocking and deeply disturbing. Perwaiz stayed silent during the hearing and said nothing before the sentence was announced. But the story didn't end there. Years later, prosecutors turned their focus to the hospital where he had performed most of his surgeries. In early 2025, a grand jury charged Chesapeake Regional Medical Center, claiming the hospital allowed him to keep operating even after problems were known. The charges said the hospital benefited from the money his surgeries brought in and failed to enforce proper safety checks. Such cases are very rare. Charging a hospital for the actions of a doctor is unusual. Prosecutors said it showed how they viewed the case, not just as one doctor acting alone, but as a failure in the larger system. The hospital has denied the allegations and said it will fight the charges. The next doctor gave real chemotherapy, but not because his patients were sick. Fata came to the United States with a medical degree and a resume that opened doors. He did a residency in Brooklyn. He completed a fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering. He worked at respected hospitals. He then set up a practice outside Detroit. He built a private health business that included Michigan Hematology Oncology, a lab, a pharmacy, and later a PET scan service. Patients came, referrals came. His practice expanded to 7 locations. By officials' count, his clinics treated thousands of people. On the surface, he looked like a success story, an immigrant who rose to the top of his field. Behind that image, officials later said, his aim was to turn medical care into steady income. The illegal acts at the center of the case had harsh effects on patients. Over years, investigators found that Fata gave wrong diagnoses on purpose. He then gave aggressive chemotherapy and other infusions and tests that patients did not need. He told some people they had multiple myeloma or other serious blood cancers. Expert review later showed those diagnoses were wrong. He put people with mild or early conditions on substances that can cause hair loss, weak bones, infections, and organ damage. He ordered long infusion sessions and repeated supportive medicines mainly to increase billing. He pushed costly PET scans. He sent prescriptions through his own pharmacy, even when that made patients wait or travel farther. He steered patients to hospice and home health providers that paid him for referrals. Those choices produced millions in insurance claims and caused physical harm. Government records show medically unnecessary infusions or injections were given to hundreds of patients, and that about $34 million in false claims went to Medicare and private insurers. How did a doctor turn care into a billing system? The court papers show how Fata used unclear diagnostic results, small lab changes, or cautious imaging, and turned them into full cancer diagnoses on paper. He claimed a so-called European protocol to justify longer treatment. He gave chemotherapy in outpatient chairs, when proper care should have been hospital-based. He padded infusion times and ordered repeat supportive substances. He told staff to send referrals to certain hospices and home care agencies that returned money to him. For some patients in remission, he insisted on ongoing maintenance infusions. For others with early warning signs that usually need only monitoring, he ordered substances with serious side effects. The court documents say he treated patients as sources of income. The longer someone sat in an infusion chair, the more he billed. The harm went beyond money. People who testified spoke about lost teeth, damaged organs, ongoing pain, and long periods of suffering. One person lost teeth after receiving Zometa. Another received hundreds of unnecessary infusions that harmed bladder and kidney function. Families described years spent on harsh treatments for illnesses that were not real. At sentencing, the court heard short, painful statements from patients and relatives asking who would pay for what was taken from them. The motive in the records was clear: money and control. Owning the infusion centers, the diagnostic services, and the pharmacy created a closed system where each patient visit could be billed many times. Sentencing papers included internal notes and false records that showed the scheme was planned to maximize billing. Prosecutors described expensive purchases and property searches that matched a lifestyle of expansion while patients suffered. The files show this was not a single mistake, but a planned effort to earn from care by mislabeling need and prolonging treatment. Conspiracy to pay and receive kickbacks, and money laundering. He faced the prospect of many years in prison. In September 2014, he pleaded guilty to multiple counts. The government sentencing papers called it a long campaign of deceit that harmed more than 500 patients. Victims filled the courtroom in July 2015 to tell the judge how his actions damaged their bodies and families. At sentencing, the scene was emotional. Fata wept and spoke. "I stand before you so ashamed of my actions," he said, his voice breaking. The judge heard victims describe ruined lives and then imposed a 45-year federal sentence. Given federal rules about time served, that sentence is likely to keep him in federal custody for the rest of his life. The court also ordered forfeiture and restitution tied to the money from the scheme. Prosecutors and family members said the punishment should have been longer, but the judge settled on 45 years. The legal story did not end there. Fata later filed motions to set aside his plea. saying his lawyer had not represented him properly. He also sought early release for health reasons years later. Courts repeatedly denied those requests. When he asked for release again in 2024, the government and many former patients opposed it, and the court denied that request too. His federal case still has ongoing motions and appeals, but the main facts, he admitted, remain on the record. Public filings show how the scheme worked, but they do not capture the daily betrayals in exam rooms. Nurses and office managers told investigators that questions were discouraged, and staff who pushed back were sidelined. Whistleblowers played a major role in exposing the scheme. Their reports, patient complaints, and careful review of notes and billing records let investigators piece together the pattern of wrong diagnoses and overtreatment. Some former employees settled lawsuits, others cooperated with prosecutors. This case shows how owning related services and a fee-for-service system can be abused when oversight is weak. The lasting outcomes are clear. Fata was ordered to forfeit millions and is serving his sentence at a federal facility. He was found guilty and remains convicted. He has tried to undo his plea and has filed appeals, but the courts have denied relief on the main claims. The next doctor performed hundreds of surgeries on paper. In reality, some of those patients never even saw an operating room. He came into the story as a surgeon with a solid resume. He had admitting privileges at hospitals across Brooklyn and Long Island. He ran a medical practice that treated wounds and offered weight loss services. He had the kind of standing that made patients trust a white coat without a second thought. That reputation hid a different life. Bank accounts grew. He submitted lists of procedures that never happened. Billing turned those phantom operations into real money. The government said the medical paperwork was being used like a ledger for theft. The evidence shown to the jury described a careful, years-long pattern of false billing. It was not presented as a bookkeeping mistake. The prosecutors said it was a deliberate scheme. From January 2011 through December 2013, Medicare got claims that, on paper, described repeated incision and drainage and wound debridement procedures. In many cases, patients and hospital records contradicted those claims. Investigators found patients who told agents they never had the billed surgery. Hospital charts often lacked entries that should exist for legitimate operating room procedures. Ahmed had been writing handwritten lists of supposed procedures. The prosecution showed those lists. He sent them to a billing company in Michigan. He told the billing company to code the work as if it had been done in an operating room so reimbursements would be higher. That pattern repeated. Lists, instructions to bill higher-paying codes, and repeated billing for the same patient occurred again and again. Medicare paid out millions. An early complaint noted that Ahmed billed Medicare at least $85 million during the period in question. The trial evidence showed Medicare actually paid more than $7 million on the fraudulent claims. The scheme had two clear tracks: the paper trail and the money trail. Bank records introduced at trial mapped tens of millions in billing. The records showed transfers of large sums between accounts. They showed sudden million-dollar moves in September 2013 that drew attention. On September 7, 2013, a check for $1 million was written from one account into another account Ahmed had opened that same day. On September 9, 2013, another $1 million left the account as an international wire to an account he held in Dubai. Investigators found seized funds in several accounts. They found retirement assets and business accounts, prosecutors said, were proceeds of the scheme. The financial map let the government show not only how the scheme worked in theory, but where the money went in practice. The court later ordered forfeiture and restitution in sums that matched the government's accounting of the ill-gotten gains. Why would a trained surgeon risk a career and liberty for billing tricks? Prosecutors gave a short answer: greed. Court papers and press statements said he treated Medicare like a personal piggy bank. The trial record added context. Ahmed was a sole practitioner with substantial assets and overseas ties. His financial moves suggested a desire to convert Medicare reimbursements into liquid wealth quickly. He was a U.S. citizen who had emigrated from Pakistan and kept family and financial connections abroad. Those ties showed up in the international wires introduced at the forfeiture hearing. Greed does not explain every choice, but the billing patterns, the instructions to upcode, and the transfers out of Medicare deposited accounts made motive clear to the jury and later to the sentencing judge. The legal fight that followed was long and detailed. Prosecutors charged Ahmed with 1 count of healthcare fraud, 3 counts of making false statements related to healthcare matters, and 2 counts of money laundering. An 11-day jury trial in July 2016 ended in conviction on all counts. The government's witnesses included auditors, bank accountants, hospital staff, and agents who linked the billing to specific patients and to specific bank flows. Defense lawyers argued the problems were billing errors, confusion over coding, or disorganization. They said Ahmed was a busy doctor who left billing to others. The jury rejected that account. After conviction, judges and prosecutors examined the financial evidence at a forfeiture hearing and in sentencing filings. The district court found Ahmed liable for a 7-figure sum and ordered forfeiture and restitution of $7,266,008.95 plus a fine. The sentencing record does not show a dramatic statement from Ahmed that changed the outcome. Instead, the court's written findings and the financial exhibits carried the day. In February 2018, U.S. District Judge Dora L. Irizarry imposed a prison term of 156 months, that is 13 years. The judge explained the sentence using the statutory sentencing factors. She noted the scale of the fraud, the vulnerability of Medicare beneficiaries, and Ahmed's apparent lack of need to commit the offense. The sentence also included the large forfeiture and restitution orders and a modest fine. Ahmed appealed parts of the sentence and the forfeiture calculations. The Court of Appeals reviewed the record and upheld the judgment. The appellate opinion found that the district court had explained its reasons and had not miscalculated the guideline range. Ahmed waived a jury decision on the forfeiture portion and asked the court to decide the money judgment. That move shaped the forfeiture hearing. Transcripts show witnesses and agents testifying about bank charts, transfers, and seized account balances more than any dramatic statements by the defendant. If you wonder whether this was an outlier or part of a larger pattern, it was both. Ahmed was one defendant in a wider effort by the Medicare Fraud Strike Force. That task force, made up of FBI and HHS OIG teams, charged many providers across several cities. His case stood out as unusually large for a single physician. The government emphasized both individual responsibility and the public impact, noting taxpayer funds were diverted from real medical care to private gain. The sentence and the forfeiture orders were meant to discourage other providers from trying to skim Medicare at scale. Now consider a doctor who steered patients into needless tests for secret payments. The next doctor told elderly patients they needed painful nerve tests, but what he really needed was something else. And if you find stories like these important, consider subscribing. Mahmoud Rahim was known to most people as Dr. Rahim. He was an internist working in the Detroit area and treated many elderly patients who were covered by Medicare. On paper, his career looked completely ordinary. He had an office in the suburbs, received regular referrals, and built strong relationships with people who depended on him for medical advice. But investigators later said that this trust became his way to earn illegal money. Rahim was accused of taking payments in return for sending his Medicare patients to expensive tests and therapy services they didn't really need. The government showed in court that he referred patients for electromyograms, or EMGs, which are muscle and nerve tests that can be quite uncomfortable. He also sent people for physical therapy performed by staff who were not properly licensed. For each referral, Rahim and some other doctors involved received secret payments. The money was passed through fake business arrangements. Rahim called part of this cash rent. The group also used shell companies to hide where the money was coming from. What looked like normal medical business on the outside was, in reality, a plan that took money from Medicare and exposed patients to procedures that were not necessary. The case was laid out in detail in June 2016. Investigators said several people were involved, including office workers and other doctors. The total amount of false billings was about $10 million. During the trial, evidence showed that Rahim referred nearly 3/4 of his patients to one neurologist for EMGs and therapy. In return, he received a fixed amount every month, along with extra money for each referral. An EMG is not a simple test. It involves the use of needle electrodes and is usually ordered only when doctors suspect a nerve or muscle issue. Prosecutors argued that many of these tests were unnecessary and were done mainly for profit, not for patient care. So what made a doctor do this? The simple answer was money. The payment system they created encouraged more referrals. The more patients sent for tests, the more money came in. It turned referrals into a source of income instead of a medical decision. There were also practical pressures. Running a clinic costs money, and steady payments disguised as rent helped cover those expenses. It made the business appear normal, even though it was built on false patient referrals. In short, personal gain took priority, and patients were the ones who suffered. The trial took place in September 2017 and lasted about a week. Prosecutors presented bank records, witness statements, and referral data to show how the scheme worked. Rahim's defense team tried to question how the evidence was used and argued that the losses were calculated incorrectly. But the jury didn't agree. On September 7, 2017, Rahim was found guilty of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and wire fraud, of paying and receiving illegal medical payments, and of receiving money connected to a federal program. The verdict changed his image completely, from a trusted doctor to someone who used his position for financial gain. During sentencing, the court focused on how much money Medicare had lost and how many improper referrals Rahim made. In February 2018, he received a sentence of 6 years and was ordered to give up $1.6 million. The exact amount of repayment to Medicare was left to be decided later. The message was clear. If a doctor chooses profit over patient care, the law will respond with serious penalties, not just administrative actions. Federal prosecutors described the case as part of a larger effort to stop medical fraud that wastes taxpayer money and harms patients. However, that was not the end. Rahim appealed the case, claiming that there were issues with how the trial was handled and how the losses were calculated. In May 2019, the appeals court reviewed the case and confirmed the original decision. The court noted that Rahim had referred patients to a neurologist who paid him in return. It also pointed out that EMGs are invasive procedures, which made the unnecessary testing even more serious. The judges found no reason to change the verdict. Later, questions arose about how long Rahim actually stayed in custody. Records show he began his sentence in early 2019. After about 15 to 19 months, the court granted him compassionate release, meaning his sentence was reduced because of special circumstances. This type of release is usually given for reasons like serious health problems or family needs. The court decided that the situation justified letting him go early. His convictions remained, but his time in custody was shortened based on those conditions. The impact of Rahim's actions reached both Medicare and his patients. Medicare paid millions of dollars for treatments that should never have been done. That money came from taxpayers. For patients, the harm was more personal. Many elderly people trusted Rahim completely and believed they needed the tests he suggested. Some went through uncomfortable procedures and unnecessary therapy sessions without any medical benefit. Records showed that this was not a one-time mistake. It was a consistent pattern where a large number of Rahim's patients were sent to the same service providers who had financial ties to him. That pattern is a clear sign of a system built around hidden payments, not genuine care. Rahim sent patients for invasive tests tied to kickbacks. What follows is a different kind of harm. Stay tuned. He walked into the courtroom not as a doctor treating patients, but as a man whose medical coat had become part of the evidence. Venkat Achi was a licensed physician who ran a pain clinic in South Bay, San Jose. He had a DEA registration and worked out of a small office in the Alum Rock area. People who knew him saw him as part of the local medical community, a familiar face in the building. Then one day, federal agents arrived. They carried out boxes filled with medication and closed the clinic's doors. The calm routine of the office turned into confusion and whispers. Investigators started asking questions, and soon, the truth began to surface. The grand jury indictment listed him as a doctor, but the documents also showed that he had prescribed thousands of controlled pills. Official records stated that what he had done was against the law. Between September 18, 2017 and July 2, 2018, Achi wrote prescriptions for hydrocodone acetaminophen without a valid medical reason. According to the plea agreement and federal filings, he gave out prescriptions without doing physical exams or reviewing pain history. For example, in November 2017, he issued a prescription that allowed a patient to receive 90 pills without any proper examination or discussion. Undercover agents posing as new patients visited his clinic. After very short appointments, They left with prescriptions for highly controlled medications. Prosecutors later counted 5,992 prescriptions for controlled substances that Achi had written in about a year. Most were for strong pain medications. These were not just numbers on paper. They represented pills that ended up in the community. The indictment included several counts for distributing controlled substances outside the scope of medicine and one count for false insurance claims. The government claimed that Achi knowingly prescribed medications without medical need and sent false claims to insurance companies to receive payment. Why would a trained doctor take that risk? The filings hinted at profit, demand, and convenience. They described a pattern: quick visits, little to no examination, frequent prescriptions for strong medications, and billing insurance for services that were not provided as claimed. The investigation was detailed. Undercover officers visited the clinic and were given prescriptions after minimal contact. This proved that the prescriptions did not come from normal medical judgment. Federal agencies such as the DEA and FBI treated this as more than a professional violation. They presented it as part of a growing public health issue. Officials said that Dr. Venkat Achi had used his position as a doctor to provide addictive pain pills without a valid reason. The FBI, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Medi-Cal fraud unit worked together on the case. Authorities made it clear that having a medical title does not excuse wrongdoing. On March 25, 2019, Achi pleaded guilty to one count of distributing hydrocodone outside professional practice and one count of healthcare fraud. Originally, he had faced 6 counts of distribution and 1 of fraud, but the plea deal reduced the charges. Even with fewer charges, the government presented large volumes of evidence, including prescription counts and undercover reports. In court, Achi admitted that he knew the prescriptions he wrote were not for real medical needs. In October 2019, Judge Edward J. Davila sentenced him to 24 months in federal prison. He was ordered to pay $82,616 in restitution and serve 3 years of supervised release. His sentence began on January 22, 2020. That decision ended the criminal case, but not the rest of the fallout. He still faced professional penalties, possible civil actions, and the lasting damage to his reputation. For a community already struggling with pain medication misuse, this case became another reminder of how trust in medicine can be broken when ethics are ignored. In the next case, families thought they were preparing for the end. They didn't realize the doctor had already decided it for them. He was a doctor who was supposed to help people make the hardest choices about life and treatment. Families trusted him to explain medical facts honestly and to guide them when it was time to move from treatment to comfort care. But according to the evidence shown in court, he used that trust for his own gain. Prosecutors said he carried out a long-running scheme that took money from Medicare and placed people in hospice care they did not actually need. The method was simple. He marked people as near the end of life, even when they were not, signed the forms without real checkups, and allowed hospice companies to charge Medicare for costly care meant for final-stage patients. This wasn't just paperwork. Real people were affected. Many were put into hospice care even though they were still living normal lives. Some of them were alive and well almost 10 years after the doctor had declared them near the end of life. According to court records, his role spread across many hospice businesses. Between around 2009 and 2014, he worked as the medical director for up to 14 hospice companies. Normally, that role should require careful supervision and medical judgment. But investigators said he became the common link among those companies. They relied on him to sign off on forms that allowed them to collect Medicare funds. His defense team claimed he only reviewed charts and relied on nurse practitioners, which is common for busy doctors. But witnesses said they were taken to his office by hospice staff, signed up for hospice care, and certified by him even though no one explained what hospice really meant. In some cases, nurses wrote brief notes afterward, and the doctor simply signed off without seeing the patients himself. That gap between paperwork and reality became the center of the government's case. The reason behind all of this, according to prosecutors, was money. He received payments from hospice companies for serving as medical director. Court documents showed that over the years he earned about $442,000 from these positions. Jurors heard how hospice companies went into low-income areas, sometimes knocking on doors to find potential patients. Those lists were sent to him for quick approval. The companies then billed Medicare for long-term hospice care. His signatures made it all possible. In the end, the jury found that his actions were responsible for over $16 million in false Medicare payments. The court ordered him to pay about $15.5 million back. The trial also revealed the human side of the case. People who had been placed in hospice care shared their confusion. Some said no one told them what was happening. Others said they were still living independently, going shopping and doing normal daily activities, even after he had signed that they had only months left. Hospice care is meant for people with a life expectancy of 6 months or less if their condition continues. But the jury heard that many of his certifications did not meet that rule. They saw how recruiters and paperwork, not real medical need, were often behind those decisions. So why would a trained doctor risk everything for something like this? The government said it came down to financial reward and a system that allowed medical signatures to be used for profit. His signature became more valuable than an actual examination. He was paid for that signature, and it was used to turn elderly patients into billable records for hospice care. Court documents showed how the money flowed and how patient charts were signed without real attention. To prove conspiracy, prosecutors called hospice employees to the stand. They described how recruiters went into neighborhoods, signed up residents, and brought them to the doctor's office for a quick visit ending with his signature. They showed records that many of the patients were not under his regular care, and that he often relied on notes from others. The jury connected the dots. The hospice companies needed a doctor who would sign forms quickly. He provided those signatures in exchange for large fees. The appeals court later confirmed the jury's decision, agreeing that the evidence clearly showed his role as the common link among the companies. In court, there were emotional moments. Patients, families, and former staff members described what it felt like to be placed into hospice care for no reason. Papers that seemed routine, admission forms, renewal dates, billing records, actually decided what kind of care elderly people received. They also determined which company would get paid by the government. The government said it wasn't just about false forms. It was about the ongoing misuse of public money meant for people truly in need. The total amount taken through the scheme, according to the evidence, was over $16 million. When the jury found him guilty on 1 conspiracy count and 7 counts of healthcare fraud, the penalties began to add up. Each count carried a maximum of 10 years. In February 2023, the judge gave him a 5-year sentence and ordered repayment of about $15,453,000. He was also ordered to report to prison in early June 2023. That marked the end of a long investigation involving several federal and state agencies. He wasn't the only one held responsible. Several others, including hospice owners and managers, had already admitted guilt earlier in the case. Their cooperation provided testimony and records that helped prosecutors connect company practices to the doctor's certifications. He also lost his medical license after state authorities took disciplinary action. That officially ended his ability to practice medicine in the state. During sentencing, the government said he had taken advantage of his position as a doctor. Instead of treating people honestly, he became part of a plan that drained funds meant for real hospice patients. The judge's sentence reflected both the scale of the fraud and the misuse of trust. The appeals court later reviewed the case and upheld the verdict, agreeing that the evidence fully supported the jury's decision and the restitution amount. The next doctor built a clinic for the underserved and used it to bill for procedures they didn't need. He came to Tallahassee looking like a man who had already lived 2 very different lives. One life was about saving people in operating rooms. The other was about running businesses and traveling the world. Moses DeGraff Johnson was born in Ghana and raised partly in the United States. He trained as a cardiovascular and thoracic surgeon. Over time, he built a strong reputation through dramatic rescue surgeries and transplant operations. He even founded the Heart and Vascular Institute of North Florida. To the public, he looked like a man on a mission, a doctor who cared about underserved communities. He ran clinics, outreach programs, and presented himself as a professional who wanted to make a difference. That is why what happened next shocked everyone. The same man who once stood in operating rooms saving lives ended up in a federal courtroom, admitting he had taken money from programs meant to help patients. This was not a small billing mistake. Starting in late 2015 or early 2016 and continuing until his arrest in February 2020, he admitted to performing unnecessary diagnostic procedures on hundreds of patients. He often performed 2 tests, 1 on each leg, even when there was no medical reason to do so. Then, during follow-up visits, His clinic billed insurance companies for a more expensive procedure that had never been done. In court, he confessed to filing over 3,000 false claims for these costly procedures, involving as many as 845 patients. Investigators discovered that about $29 million in payments were linked to this scheme. That number alone made the case serious enough to draw federal attention. The pattern was carefully planned. Prosecutors explained how he reached out to vulnerable people through churches, nursing homes, hospitals, and community organizations. Many of these patients were older or had ongoing health issues. They trusted a doctor who appeared to care. Records showed a repeating cycle: an initial test, a follow-up visit, another test, and another follow-up. This created a trail of paperwork that allowed him to bill again and again. In other cases, his clinic simply falsified records to show that a higher-paying procedure had been done. Investigators also found that he sometimes billed for treatments while he was not even in the country. Authorities later tracked the money and found it had been spent on homes, cash, and luxury vehicles. They moved to seize those assets. So how did a trained heart surgeon end up performing procedures people didn't need? The court heard several explanations. Prosecutors said he had used his medical skills to take advantage of insurance programs and to live a life funded by money that should have gone to real patients. His defense team painted a softer picture. They said he had done a lot of charitable work in poor areas. They claimed that while his actions were wrong, some of the procedures had limited medical value and were not physically harmful. When he spoke in court, he expressed regret. He said he took full responsibility and was embarrassed by what had happened. The judge had to weigh two sides: the harm done to patients and the financial losses against his personal history and remorse. The question remained: why would a successful surgeon risk everything for money? The answer had layers. One was greed. Prosecutors showed detailed evidence of expensive spending and deliberate changes in billing codes. Another factor was how easily false claims can be hidden within the complex medical billing system. And then, there was the personal side. A man who may have started with good intentions, but slowly justified his actions to himself. Whatever the reason, the evidence was strong enough for prosecutors to bring 56 counts of healthcare fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of identity. The legal process began in early 2020, when federal charges were unsealed. He first entered preliminary pleas, but later, on December 18, 2020, he admitted guilt to multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. The court documents listed every part of the pattern: the false claims, the number of patients, and the amount of financial loss. One charge involved the use of other people's identifiers to make the claims, which meant extra prison time under federal law. On November 18, 2021, the judge held the sentencing hearing. Patients and their families were there. Prosecutors asked for a longer prison term, saying the fraud had gone on for years and had hurt many vulnerable patients. Experts testified that some patients never needed the tests at all, and that false records could create problems for their future care. The defense presented family members who described him as a caring father and a man who once worked to help people. He spoke again, saying he was deeply sorry and ashamed of what he had done. The judge listened to both sides carefully and decided on a sentence of 7 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay back about $28.5 million. That sentence was shorter than what the prosecutors had requested, but the judge said it reflected both the harm done and the personal circumstances. For the patients, no punishment could undo what they went through. Some said they felt deeply betrayed. One sought therapy. Others worried about the accuracy of their medical records. The government promised to help fix those records and recover the money taken from healthcare programs. Along with prison time, he was ordered to give up several properties and large amounts of cash linked to the scheme. Investigators found homes in New York and other locations, along with over $1 million in seized funds. They also traced luxury items and overseas accounts connected to his business dealings. The goal was to recover as much as possible through asset forfeiture and restitution. There were also small personal details that made this case hard to forget. Years earlier, he had reportedly helped operate on the rapper 50 Cent after a shooting, which showed how skilled and respected he once was. In court, his family read letters from his children and spoke about his past good deeds. These moments showed a man who had done great things but made serious choices that changed everything. For those affected, the story ended with a simple truth. A trusted doctor used his position to take advantage of people who believed in him. Up next is $50 million in billed claims, $33 million paid, and one doctor. He introduced himself as a doctor who ran a mobile medical service. He visited nursing homes and patients' houses, wrote prescriptions, signed charts, and billed insurance companies for the care provided. For years, this looked like a normal medical business. But prosecutors later revealed that something very different was happening behind the scenes. According to investigators, his company submitted thousands of billing records that did not match the real care patients received. The paperwork listed the doctor as the one who provided the treatment. In reality, the work was done by nurse practitioners, wound care nurses, social workers, and even interns without proper licenses. Some bills also listed treatments that were not actually needed. Everything was recorded and coded in a way that made it look legitimate to insurance systems. Investigators said the false claims led to millions in improper payments from Medicare and private insurers. The original report showed about $50 million in billed claims and $33 million in received payments. Later, the doctor admitted that the actual loss to insurers was at least $3.7 million. Prosecutors described the pattern clearly. The doctor's name and credentials were used to request higher payments for care that was actually done by lower-paid staff. Some claims exaggerated the level of service. Others billed for visits when the only recordable act was giving a COVID vaccine. These actions were repeated across multiple programs including Medicare, TRICARE, Medicaid, and private insurers like Blue Cross Blue Shield and United Healthcare. Investigators from several federal agencies followed the trail of paperwork. They compared medical charts and billing records and found mismatches. In many cases, when the claim showed a doctor's name, there was no real record of that doctor providing the service. Prosecutors said this was not an accident. The doctor admitted that he knowingly pushed the billing higher to increase payments. The reason, as investigators explained, was simple: money. The setup brought in millions of dollars, and the fake records were meant to protect that income. The next question was how this could go unnoticed for so long. The answer was in how the documents were prepared. Medical charts were adjusted to match the false claims. Descriptions were written to make routine work sound more complex. Each chart listed the doctor as the provider, even when someone else did the job. These changes helped the system approve the payments automatically and made the records look real. The case moved through the federal system step by step. A grand jury issued charges in October 2021. The legal process continued for nearly 2 years, with investigations and hearings. In March 2024, instead of going to trial, the doctor accepted a plea deal. He admitted to one count of healthcare fraud and accepted the details presented by prosecutors, including the loss, amount, and the thousands of false claims. During sentencing, the court considered how much money was lost, how long the scheme lasted, and the fact that the doctor accepted responsibility. In October 2024, Judge John C. Hinderaker sentenced him to 2 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay more than $1.1 million in restitution to private insurers and another $2.5 million to the government. These payments, along with his sentence, marked the official end of the case.